It's yours.
Thank you so much. So yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn. I am the country representative for Cambodia at the Global Green Growth Institute, GGGI. And we are an intergovernmental organization. Cambodia is one of our member states. They're even a founding member. Cambodia is one of the countries that, that set up GGGI back in 2012. And so our job is to promote green growth, as you will have guessed. And we define green growth as a growth that is economically strong, but also environmentally sustainable and socially inclusive. So I think that speaks quite well to your class about sustainable development. Our program in Cambodia is focused on sustainable urban development. So we run projects in waste management and sanitation, in greening industries. But today we are here to talk about our work in the transport sector. I want to say, do follow us on Facebook. We have lots of content all the time about sustainable development and green growth in Cambodia and in the world. We regularly have internship positions and we recruit junior staff from time to time. So do check us out. I think people who have followed this class have a very interesting profile for us. Before I pass the floor to my colleagues, I want to say that we are doing this lecture as part of a 1-month campaign that we're running about sustainable mobility and electric mobility. Together with our colleagues from Energy Lab, who are also online and who will also be participating in the lecture. So yes, for the campaign that you can also find on our Facebook pages at GGGI and Energy Lab, we're producing a number of videos about sustainable transport. We are giving guest lectures here and at ITC. There's a number of press interviews. There were a number of pop-up events where people could come and test ride vehicles, electric vehicles, and we had planned one this week for American University, but unfortunately, because of the COVID situation, it has been postponed. But in any case, we hope to see you on campus very soon and to offer you the opportunity to try some of the vehicles yourself. And we are running a social media campaign where you can win $100 if you post a picture of yourself driving an electric vehicle. So definitely check that out. It is worth the effort. Maybe before I pass the floor to my colleague Alice, who will be kicking off the lecture, maybe my colleagues from Energy Lab want to introduce themselves. Falcon?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Caroline. Hello, everyone. My name is Pakun, and I'm from Energy Lab. And a little bit about Energy Lab. We are an international NGO, and we are working to support the growth of clean energy market in Cambodia, especially entrepreneurships and innovations. And as Caroline mentioned, please follow us on Facebook. We have a bunch of information shared on our Facebook page. And if you Google Energy Lab, you will see a bunch of programs we are currently running with entrepreneurships and innovation. So yeah, it's nice to see all of you today.
Good. Thank you so much, Falcon. And with that, I think the floor goes to Alice.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'll just share my screen with you. Okay. So I wanted to start by making this a little bit interactive. If you can visit slido.com and enter the code or scan this QR code, and I'll do a quick live poll just to get your ideas and perceptions about electric mobility. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to scan the code and visit the site. And then I'll ask you some quick questions on there. As Caroline mentioned, this is part of a campaign. So we've previously done assessments to find out people's perceptions about electric mobility. And so we want to hear your opinions. Have you ever driven an electric motorbike? What do you think about them?
Alice, I think if we hit the person button, the screen can be enlarged.
Is it not enlarged?
Not on my screen.
Okay, sorry about that. It should be.
Jose, do you get a full screen view?
Not yet.
No, we see just the first, we see the full screen,
Okay.
but we only see your first slide. Okay, so now you have it. Now.
Okay.
So, I think your QR code is, there you go. It's in the second slide.
There we
Okay,
go.
very good. Now we have it.
Okay. Oh, good. Yeah.
Okay.
Please scan the code, visit the website. Let's take a second. And then. Okay, so we've got one answer so far. There's at least 16 of you in the class. 6
I'm
answers.
sorry, I'm using my phone to attend this lecture, so I cannot use the QR code.
That's okay, don't worry about it. Okay, so majority no. We have a few that have. Next question. True or false? Is an electric motorcycle more expensive than a gasoline motorcycle? What do you think? Interesting. Okay, so it's almost split evenly about this question, but this is something we'll explore throughout the lecture, the economic impact of electric vehicles and motorbikes in Cambodia. Very interesting. So the majority think electric motorcycles are cheaper. I wonder if that's true. Okay, thanks for that, guys. Thanks for your participation. So the objective of today's lecture is to understand the need for sustainable transport and the role that electric mobility is playing to achieve this. We'll look at the environmental concerns, the barriers that exist to the adoption of electric vehicles in Cambodia and beyond, and the opportunities that are there for electric vehicles. So what is so unsustainable about transport? Well, strong economic growth, population growth, this has all contributed to a strong demand for vehicle ownership, and particularly private vehicle ownership. As you can see on the graph on the left, that's Cambodia's GDP per capita and the number of registered vehicles. As the country gets wealthier, more vehicles are owned. This causes traffic congestion, increased emissions, air pollution. As you can see on the other graph, transport is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, more than energy industries and manufacturing industries. So conventional vehicles run on fossil fuels. The emissions produced by fossil fuel vehicles are a major contributor to global warming. In 2016, transport emissions accounted for over 24% of global CO2 emissions. That's set to reach 80% by 2050. Alongside emissions as air pollution, transport generates more than 80% of air pollution in cities in developing countries. This is a major health concern, especially in cities where there's densely populated urban areas and lots of traffic congestion. As you can see, figures, news titles like the one on the right appear frequently, showing rising concerns about deaths caused by outdoor air pollution. So while we're lucky in Cambodia, we don't really have bad air pollution, bad air quality. That's not to say we shouldn't be taking measures to prevent it, as urbanization is increasing and so is vehicle ownership. So what are countries doing to combat the greenhouse gas emissions and the air pollution from transport? Well, in 2016, 189 countries signed the Paris Agreement within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The aim of this is to reduce the risks and impact of climate change by keeping the increasing global average temperature to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and to limit that increase to 1.5 degrees. Each country has set their own 5-year plan. This is an ambitious plan to mitigate climate change, and these are referred to as the nationally determined contributions. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with these. In Cambodia's first NDC, there was a 27% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 target. But in the most recent update in 2020, they've increased that target to 47.7%.
reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So how does transport play into this? How are we going to change transport to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions? Well, 80% of NDCs across the world identify transport as an important source of greenhouse gas emissions and something that needs to be intervened. While in Cambodia's 2020 NDC update, there was no specific target for transport, there are mentions that indicate that we need to be doing something. The 30 vehicle inspection centres by 2030, promotion of integrated public transport in main cities, and upgrading technology and e-mobility. While we're going to focus on electric mobility in this lecture, I do really want to stress that this isn't the entire solution. We know that electric mobility is part of a bigger plan. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it should be complemented by other forms of sustainable transport and strategies. As you can see, the framework on the left here shows the avoid, shift, improve strategy. Firstly, we avoid transport altogether. How? That might mean better urban planning, so that we don't have to use transport to reach our schools, universities, shops, work. Second, we shift to a more environmentally friendly mode of transport. That might be walking, cycling, and public transport. And lastly, we improve our transport. We improve the energy efficiency of transport by switching to electric vehicles rather than those that use fuel. Why is electric mobility in the last improve part of that? Why is it not our first solution? Well, for one, electric mobility doesn't solve the issue of traffic congestion. It also doesn't solve the issue of accidents on the road. And as you can see on this picture on the right, this shows the road space required for 80 people. Cars easily take up the most space, followed by motorbikes and then buses. So you can determine where we can find our solutions, and maybe everyone owning their own electric vehicle isn't going to solve everything. So where does electric mobility fit in? Well, the reality is that many of us rely on our cars and our motorbikes to get around in everyday life. But to improve the transport sector and achieve the NDC targets, we need to switch to electric vehicles. A recent report by the International Energy Agency said that to reach carbon neutrality in 2050, half of all cars globally should be electric by 2030. Carbon neutrality refers to achieving net zero carbon emissions. So I hope I've established here the need for sustainable mobility, but I want to go over a brief overview of the technology that's available for electric vehicles and the global trends in electric mobility today. So there are a few different types of electric vehicles. The most common that you will see on the roads today are hybrid electric vehicles. These use a main source of gasoline, but they have a combination of electric motor and gasoline motor. There's also a battery electric vehicle. These are only powered by batteries and produce no direct emissions. And then you have a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, which also uses a motor and an engine, electric motor and an engine, but electric is the main source of power. There are also a few different types of charging systems that you should be aware of. These range from those that you see on the left here, overhead wiring and opportunity charging for things like trams and buses. This can be quite slow, clunky, it's not very flexible, whereas you have plug-in charging that can be fast or slow. So it might take a matter of hours to charge your electric vehicle, or you'd have to charge it overnight. And then you also have battery swapping systems. These are where you can exchange your used battery for a new fully charged battery. So you have less worries about having to charge it yourself. So the global markets for electric vehicles show that there is a major spike in popularity. As of 2019, there are around 7.2 million electric cars globally. Sales of electric vehicles are expected to increase to 41 million by 2040. But as the graph on the right shows, these sales and these car stocks are increasingly disproportionate. They're concentrated in a few countries, with 80% of EVs sold in just 3 countries. That's Norway, China, and the United States. There's reasons for this. Maybe it's an enabling environment that allows this to happen, which we'll explore later. Things like policies, incentives for buying electric vehicles. So as this demand for electric vehicles has skyrocketed, companies, private companies have noticed this, and they've all started to join the train and come out with their own electric vehicles and their own targets. As you can see, brands like BMW, General Motors, Harley Davidson, they're all competing to create the next and best electric vehicle. This demand will drive technology, it'll advance infrastructure. So it'll be interesting to see who comes out with the best electric vehicle. Next, I want to look at the impact of electric vehicles. We know they're growing in popularity. We know there's a need for them to achieve sustainable transport, but we can't ignore some of the negative impacts that they have, as well as accounting for the positive impacts. So in 2019, electric vehicles emitted 51 million tons of CO2. That might sound like a lot, but it's about half the amount that would have been emitted by the same amount of conventional vehicles. The greenhouse gas emission savings from electric vehicles are really quite undeniable. In a recent study we conducted with the Ministry of Environment on electric motorbikes in Cambodia, we found that conventional motorbikes that run on gasoline emit 9 times more emissions than electric motorbikes. Furthermore, electric vehicles don't emit noise or air pollution, at least not directly. Electric vehicles do create emissions, but this is through an indirect phase, either in the production phase, manufacturing of motorbikes and cars, or from grid emissions. So what is powering the electricity? Where are we getting this electricity from? If the grid is made up of coal and fossil fuels, then maybe electric vehicles aren't as clean as they could be. So to ensure that EVs unleash their full potential to mitigate climate change, we need to clean the grid. An increasing number of countries are taking actions to do this and to have renewable sources of energy. But as you can see from this pie chart on the left, in Cambodia, it's still dominated by fossil fuels, although there is quite a lot of hydro. So there needs to be some movement to create cleaner energy. On the right, you can see there are developments for things like solar-powered rickshaws to create cleaner electric mobility. I will pass over to my colleague at Energy Lab now, who will sort of dive more into what it means to have clean energy in Cambodia. Over to you, Falcon.
Thank you, Alice. All right, you can skip over the slide because I've already mentioned about Energy Lab. Cool. Thank you. So yeah, as Alice mentioned about what does it mean to decarbonize electricity generations. So if we imagine that we have more clean sources in our electricity generation, it means that we have more clean energy mix sources in our generations, and it will bring more clean, more greener, and more sustainable to our EVs, as Alice mentions. So I want to dive into what is clean energy. So I want to turn into the class and kind of ask, what are the ringing buzzwords when you come across clean energy? And if you can let me know in a chat box, and yes. So if you can leave in the chat box, let me know what is the clean energy means to you. That would be great. I'll leave you a few moments to do that. All right, I see environmental friendly energy, question mark. Any more clean energy means no pollutions and also renewable. That is the correct answer, renewable. So I'm hearing a lot of the word renewable, and that is correct. No emissions, great. Well, I think that's all the right answer about clean energies. And to give you the definition of clean energy is a source of energy that we can use and benefit from, such as solar, wind, hydro, and biomass. And the good characteristic about clean energy is that it does not pollute the environment, or it does not harm the environment. If you can turn to the next slide, Alice. Thank you. So the form of clean energy sources that you might see are solar. So some of you might already seen them around Phnom Penh, like a small solar panel that was put up on the rooftop. So they put out the panels out into the sun. The light hit the panels, and the panel convert the light into electrical energy or heat energy. And this source of energy is clean energy because it's renewable. It won't run out, and it does not pollute the environment. The same one with wind energy. Unfortunately, in Cambodia, we don't have wind energy happening yet, but there's exciting project that coming up in Bokul Mountain. So we're hoping to see more of these projects in Cambodia to bring more clean energy into Cambodia. And the third one is hydropower. Cambodia has quite a lot of this projects around Mekong River. However, one thing that they don't know necessarily not consider is the environmental harm of hydropower that it puts to the environment, like the fish, the water environment, and also the people that surrounds it. And bioenergy, like biomass that converts the animals and plants into energy. Alice, can you, of course. And clean energy is also about using energy efficiently and use energy smartly. So rather than generating more energy, we can reduce consumption. For example, if I talk about in a general context, when you leave the room, you turn off the lights. That's one way to use energy efficiently. And use energy smartly, meaning that we can use data, monitoring systems, or automation to control the schemes. For example, in the case of EV, maybe we can use battery to charge the electricity when there is the clean energy available during the day, for example. Of course, there are benefits to clean energy. One is cheaper. So most of the time, people confuse that clean energy is expensive. Actually, it's really not true, because in the last 10 years, solar energy, for example, are actually drastically dropping. The cost of the solar is actually drastically dropping. For example, in recent years, the cost of electricity of solar actually is priced at 3.877 cents per kilowatt hour, is actually cheaper than hydro and coal. And of course, it's environmentally sound. It's one run out is renewable, and it doesn't harm the environment. And of course, it's a contribute to the growth of GDP and local employment. But there's projects that are available. It's there's need more finance person. There's need more people to do the policy making and all of that. Of course, it's also reliable because such as solar and wind, we can install locally, and it's actually faster compared to coal project or hydro dam project. So like hydro and coal, it requires more times. It actually takes 3 to 7 years to build, whereas solars only take a month to build. If we look at the energy mix trends in Cambodia versus global, in 2018, 49% were coming from renewable in Cambodia. And if you look in the world, it's only 29%. However, in 2030, Cambodia is looking at the different directions, actually going to in the opposite directions to the world. So it's really important for Cambodia at this point, really significant, really urgent that Cambodia should think about, reconsider in decision makings of what are the energy sources that they should include in the grid, so that we can shift into more renewable energy. And not only from environmental perspective, but also from economic perspective as well.
Okay. Thank you, Falcon. Are you?
Yeah, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, all right, no problem. Okay, so I'll play you now a video that we have produced as part of this campaign that features a professor at the Institute of Technology, Cambodia, he's working on a project to do with solar-powered electric tuk-tuk. So let me just turn this with you. Okay.
Nhóm chung một môn thướng, nhóm cứ chia pha pha cha, nâng chỉ nè pha chia này chỉ tham chạy chỉ Cambodia, rồi có gì hỏi ta phải là tiếng nói. Nếu không nói project đại nhóm bạn, là nhóm thua thông chừng kia cứ chỉ project ở bao cái vùng ấp rốn, cam chung mùi ở bờ thầm ở bao World Bank, đại nhóm thua tệ tông từ nâng topic solar tục đại prai phang rồi có prai ghé thầm đá, cứ dương khơi tha nước nông dạy về dễ nước nông dạy về vén các bà tụ tổ kỹ ní vì tụ ban phò trong này còn vì ai miên là tập hiệp nông ca chui các bạn thôi phò bà phò từ lời bài thán đòi ca các bạn thôi các bà thang phò là kỹ ní đại ai miên được phục màu pi bên internet chúng pua project ní cứ dương tâm mà chập đào bạn dạy về là pi bài khái rồi máu cứ dương tâm đã tâm mà chập đào chỉ mùi nâng nifat master không dạy về là bị bạch hại chúng tôi phân nifat để qua trong showroomធ្វើការនៅក្នុង project នេះគឺខ្ញុំចង់បានឲ្យគាត់ចូលធ្វើការសិក្សាក្នុងឋានៈ master នៅក្នុងសាលា Techno ហើយគាត់ត្រូវតែជា nifat ដែលរៀននៅក្នុងជំនាញ electronic និងប្រព័ន្ធ fiber watt ម្យ៉ាងវិញទៀតគឺខ្ញុំក៏សង្ឃឹមថាចំពោះនិស្សិតដែលបានបញ្ចប់ការសិក្សាចេញពីសាលាទៅដែលបានធ្វើការទទួលនៅផ្នែកហ្នឹងគាត់អាចមានឱកាសដើម្បីបង្កើតការរកស៊ីខ្លួនឯងនៅក្នុងវិស័យទូកគិសនីនេះតើតើទៅនឹងបរិបទរបស់ពិភពលោកហើយនឹងការប្រែប្រួលអាកាសធាតុរបស់ពិភពលោកក៏វាជួយកាត់បន្ថយនៅផលប៉ះពាល់ទៅលើបរិស្ថានការកំណើនកម្ដៅផែនដីជាដើមដោយសារការចូលរួមប្រើប្រាស់ថាមពលអគ្គិសនីនិងការប្រើប្រាស់ថាមពលកកើតឡើងវិញពីចុងបញ្ចប់គឺខ្ញុំចង់និយាយទៅកាន់ Fernifit ដែលគាត់មានចំណាប់អារម្មណ៍ទៅនឹង topic របស់ខ្ញុំឬក៏ទៅនឹង topic យានយន្តអគ្គិសនីជាដើមនៅប្រទេសយើងគឺយើងមានឱកាសច្រើន Fernifit ទាំងអស់នៅពេលឥឡូវនេះគឺគាត់មានឱកាសច្រើនដើម្បីចូលរួមធ្វើការងារនៅក្នុង topic ហ្នឹង
Okay. Thanks to Falcon for that introduction to clean energy. There are lots of benefits to electric vehicles, and especially if we can switch to clean energy, but we can't ignore some of the environmental problems that arise with electric vehicles. So EVs are usually contain a battery that is either lead acid or lithium ion. The problem with these batteries, it starts, well, for lithium ion, it starts at the very start of the supply chain in mining the materials. It can be dangerous and it can cause environmental damage in terms of air pollution, soil pollution. This can be very harmful. As batteries get used, the lifespan of these batteries, it doesn't last forever. An average lithium ion battery can last 2 to 3 years. Lead acid, they don't last as long. So what do you do with them once they've been used? What do you do with the waste? Well, this waste can be highly toxic, and without the correct recycling facilities, it can be a threat to public health as well as to the environment. The issue is that recycling is expensive and it's complicated. Not many countries around the world have the correct facilities to do it, and in Cambodia, we aren't so fortunate. We don't have those facilities. So that means exporting this waste. And with that, it's complicated and it's expensive. So we need to consider how we will deal with this waste. However, before you decide electric vehicles aren't for me, I don't want to be a problem causing waste, It's important to note that electric vehicles aren't the only things that use these batteries. These batteries already exist. They might be in your existing cars and motorbikes, your phones, your electronic devices. This is an existing challenge, but one that we need innovation and careful consideration to manage. So the economic impact of electric vehicles. As we showed in the poll at the start of the lecture, it was pretty split on whether people thought electric motorcycles were more affordable or more expensive than gasoline vehicles. Well, the good news is that electric vehicles in general are going down in price. And that's for one, because of the cost of the batteries is going down. The cheaper the battery, the cheaper the vehicles. So it's progressing, as you can see on this graph, and eventually it will be at a very affordable level. Motorcycles specifically in Cambodia, we found with our study with the Ministry of Environment that the motorcycle cost over 10 years, once you take into account the long-term costs, things like operating costs, maintenance costs, it's much lower than gasoline motorcycles. Granted, in our study, we just looked at brand new gasoline motorcycles and not secondhand, which I know many people buy their motorcycle in secondhand markets. That's something to consider. So I hope that we've shown the environmental impacts of electric vehicles, be it the need for clean energy, the need for innovation with batteries, but also the potential that they hold to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and for Cambodia and other countries to achieve their targets in reducing emissions around the world. So what are the barriers that are stopping electric vehicles? Why aren't we all driving electric vehicles? And how can we create a better environment for electric vehicles to succeed? Barriers in Cambodia exist. There are a number of barriers, including limited information, policy gaps, poor quality, and not enough infrastructure. Lack of awareness around electric mobility was identified as one of the key problems. In a study by the Ministry of Environment, only 34% of people surveyed knew what an e-motorcycle was. Granted, I think you all know technology a bit more, you know about motorcycles, maybe you take a sustainable development class, so you might not be in that percentage. But nevertheless, that's quite a lot of people that don't know about electric motorcycles. There are also policy gaps. By policy gaps, I mean there's not a lot of government support for electric mobilities. This could be financial incentives, like tax reductions if you buy an electric vehicle over a gasoline vehicle, or if you buy an electric vehicle, maybe you get parking priorities or traffic priorities. There's also limited infrastructure. Where do you charge your electric motorbike? This is a key concern for people. Where do you charge your electric car and where do you charge your electric motorbike? If you don't know these things, you have something called range anxiety. How far can you go before you need to charge? It's not very good having an electric vehicle if you can't go a certain amount of distance without needing to go home and charge it again. There's also an issue with quality. Without national standards, which Cambodia is developing but doesn't currently have, for electric motorcycles and electric vehicles, bad quality electric vehicles can flood the market. This lowers consumer trust. This means that people will try a bad electric motorcycle that might have a bad battery, for instance, and they'll be put off and they won't want to make the switch. There's also limited designs, speed, and range of these vehicles. But as we suggested earlier, with the more popularity that these gain, the more and more companies will be creating electric vehicles, and hopefully they'll look cooler and cooler by the day. So in recent years, electric policy incentives have been increasingly accompanied by longer-term vision to phase out conventional vehicles. Headlines make the news more increasingly day by day of countries that are taking drastic measures to ensure that people switch to electric vehicles. In the UK, for instance, they're banning the sale of petrol and diesel cars and vans by 2030, sorry. So that means by 2030, only electric vehicles will be sold on the roads. It's quite a drastic measure. Many countries are also using incentives to encourage people to buy electric vehicles, stimulating the demand, making them even cheaper. Another way to get around some of the difficulties of electric vehicles is to use a battery swapping business model. So one example of this that has been very successful is a Taiwan-based company called Gogoro. They're a huge electric vehicle company in Taiwan. Their electric motorbikes dominate electric vehicles in Taiwan. How it works is you go to a Go Station swap to swap your discharge battery for a fresh pack. There are over 1,000 of these stations in Taiwan. They are placed every 500 meters in urban Taiwan, and it takes just 6 seconds for a user to switch out the battery. This makes it very easy and removes any of that anxiety that people might have about where do they go to charge their motorcycle. You know, what if they get stuck with no electricity? This removes all of that. As of May 2019, the company had sold over 160,000 scooters. The success of this is really down to a couple of main points. Firstly, they look cool. They do a good job on their marketing and their branding, and they're nice bikes and people genuinely want to ride them. But also the government has done a lot to support the brand. The central government has paid for half of the cost to build swapping stations and offers them publicly accessible land to put these swapping stations on. Their support has helped catapult Gogoro to success. So how about the focus in Cambodia? Well, there's a reason that electric motorcycles have been mentioned quite often throughout this presentation, and that's because motorcycles represent around 87% of vehicle registrations in Cambodia. That's a huge proportion, and many people rely on them for their everyday life. If we focus on these as high usage motorcycles, and in densely populated cities where things like battery swapping stations or access to charging points are achievable, then we can make some headway in increasing electric vehicles in Cambodia. There's also, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, a brand called AUPP is doing a ride sharing app. Go to and you download an app and you find one of the stations where these electric bikes are parked. You take it, you pay by the minute or the hour, ride around, and then you can leave it anywhere in Phnom Penh and they will come and pick it up, charge the battery for you, and you don't have to worry. So ride sharing apps like that could also encourage use of electric motorcycles, and they give people the opportunity to try electric motorcycles without having to make the purchase first. So what incentives could drive electric vehicles in Cambodia? Well, there are fiscal and non-fiscal incentives. Fiscal incentives essentially mean financing. That might be tax reductions, purchase incentives. As you can see on the headline on the right, recently a vehicle import duty tax was proposed to be reduced. That was going to take a 20% reduction in the import tax of electric cars from 30% to 10%. That will make electric cars cheaper overall if it's passed, and therefore encourage people to make the switch. Other countries have also done things like purchase incentives. If you buy an electric vehicle, the government will aid that, will give you some money towards it for making the switch. It's important to consider what might be possible with the financial and human resources that we have in Cambodia and other countries. This will differ, and it might take the support of private companies to do this. Non-fiscal incentives could include things like special lane access, parking allowances, registration fee exemption, to just give some perks to driving electric. Why should you make the switch? Well, because you'll benefit in some way. So alongside these incentives and these strategies, it is important to consider that electric vehicles need to be mainstreamed into our long-term development goals and into the transport sector overall. We need an integrated approach that looks at how electric vehicles are going to interact with public transport, with with other plans in transport as well. As mentioned earlier about national standards, currently national standards for electric motorcycles are underway. That is being carried out by UNDP, Clean Air Asia, and the government to work on the Technical Committee of Automotive Product. Their aim is to establish standards for electric 2- and 3-wheelers in Cambodia and propose a work plan for the adoption and implementation of standards. These standards will build consumer trust by showing that only high quality bikes and batteries are allowed in the country. In Taiwan, they set standards in response to consumer complaints about electric motorcycles. The government stipulated that you had to pass these standards in order to receive the subsidy. Their standards included things like getting the vehicle approved by government, attaching a lithium-ion battery pack, and meeting the criteria of performance and safety. So what is GGGI doing in Cambodia to work on electric mobility? Two of our projects are focusing on this. One is electric motorcycles, which is part of this campaign today and part of this lecture, is that we're promoting the use of electric motorcycles in Cambodia. This has involved an assessment of communication needs and policy recommendations. There's also an e-bus project that is looking at integrating electric buses in Siem Reap. This is in the feasibility stage at the moment, working with the Ministry of Public Works and Transport to decipher how electric buses could help a Siem Reap transporting tourists and local communities alike to reduce the emissions in a particularly important and historic city. Next, I will show you a video that we also produced as part of the campaign, just to show you the range of electric motorcycles that we have in Cambodia, the options that are available, and they look pretty cool. So I'll just play it for you now. As my colleague Caroline mentioned at the start of this lecture, we are running a social media campaign where you could win $100. One of 5 $100 prizes are up for grabs. If you want to join, please scan the QR code or visit Energy Lab's Facebook or our Facebook, and you'll find the list of rules and what it takes to apply. But it's really quite simple. Take a picture of yourself on any electric vehicle and post it to that page, and you'll be in a chance of winning. We've also included our report here, GGGI's report on promoting green mobility through electric motorcycles. So please feel free to dig deeper into that. I'll now open the floor if you've got any questions for myself or my colleagues, Falcon or Caroline. So please, thank you, everyone. I think we had one question a little bit earlier, Falcon, that says, does a nuclear power plant is considered as clean energy? Do you want to address that one?
Cool. Yep. Thank you, Watana, for the questions. I think it's a really good questions, right? With the nuclear power plant, it's actually considered a renewable energy, but there are some environmental concerns with the waste. And it's been kind of controversial in the conversations. And this actually is like comparing to less harmful renewable energies such as like hydro, like I mentioned. It is considered as renewable, but does it good for the environment, right? So there's like some issue related to environments. It's people, it's the the people who surrounded it. So with the nuclear power plants, it's with the waste radioactive, it's need a clear plans and process to make sure that the waste is not going to harm people, it's not going to harm the environment around them. So with different sorts of clean energy or renewable energy that's being used, there are comparison advantages and disadvantages, and we weight them comparing to that. Do we answer your question, Watana? I'm not sure if she's here or he's here. But... Cool.
Is it okay if I ask through microphone?
Of
Yes,
course.
please.
Okay. So be warned though, because I'm gonna sound very pessimistic. So hold on, I lost my train of thought. I failed to conceive electric vehicle being a success in Cambodia for this one reason. You can call it an Achilles heel if you want. So it's the fact that electric vehicle require a certain amount of time to recharge, whereas gas vehicle can basically recharge instantaneously. And that is a big deal for Cambodian because unlike in the US, the driving culture here is very different. In the US, for example, the use of their vehicle is pretty straightforward. You go from your home and go to your the place you work. It's pretty straightforward. But here in Cambodia, vehicles are more integral to their livelihood. I mean, their ability to put food on the table depends on their vehicle. For example, you are a delivery man, you need your vehicle. You sell vegetables, you need your motorcycle to deliver it. So they use their vehicle more intensely, if that's the correct way to put it. And the fact that assuming they use electric vehicle, they will have to recharge it. And that would prevent them from using their vehicle for a certain amount of time. And I think for Cambodian, that is a deal breaker. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'll start with this one. I agree, those are really, really valid concerns. I think one thing that we want to stress is that the focus on inner city trips, so urban areas where distances aren't that long, that's the focus to start with electric vehicles and particularly with electric motorcycles. People shouldn't have to drive that far to get to the next charging station, et cetera, et cetera. That also means ramping up electric vehicle infrastructure, so charging infrastructure in cities. And things like the battery swapping model, that would remove those issues because people would be able to swap a battery quickly and then carry on and to continue using their bike for everyday purposes. But definitely very valid points. Anyone else have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that you should say that because that's exactly the concern that comes up out of our user surveys, and I think it's a primary concern on the driver's side. It's that anxiety around the range of a vehicle and the time it takes to charge it, and that's exactly why we emphasize that what is needed is approaching electric vehicles not as a product but as a service, and approaching batteries as a service. So what we want to promote as international organizations and what we believe the government should promote is business models such as battery swapping. If you evolve to a situation, and I don't think we're far from that, where every street corner has a battery swapping station, then it takes 60 seconds for you to swap your battery and drive off again. That's actually quicker than filling up a gasoline tank. Also, if donors and government can provide charging infrastructure and charging services for electric buses, for example, those technologies are advancing very quickly. And electric buses, if they can charge at every bus stop just quickly, they can easily keep going for an entire day. So it's about offering service solutions to the issues around range and to the issues around charging times. I think you're absolutely right. The initial model where we all thought of electric vehicle as just a product that I buy and then I drive along, and then every time I have to recharge, it means I have to go and sit somewhere for 4 hours, or I can only do it at home at night. I think that is not a promising model towards sustainable transport solutions. What is the average lifespan of a battery charge? That evolves quickly, and it depends a lot on the quality of the battery. But I think for motorbikes right now, we're looking on average at around 4 hours. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And otherwise it depends a lot on the vehicle. For buses and cars, it's obviously longer, but then you have also systems of intermittent charging. Assuming that the government would not sponsor the battery stations, are there any profit incentives for possible service providers? Yes, so government subsidies is only one solution, of course. We are currently looking at getting international donors to provide a grant to support the development of battery stations across Phnom Penh and the bigger cities. And we are also working with the Ministry of Environment to design a microfinance scheme whereby people would get access to very cheap loans to purchase an electric motorbike, and so create a financial incentive to opt for electric rather than gasoline. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but you're happy to flag.
I think another interesting possibility with battery charging stations is to tie them to building permits. So a new building wants to go up, a new condo, and this has been done in other countries. You stipulate that it has to include a charging station, and that addresses that issue quite well without the government having to subsidize it.
So another one from me, if that's okay. How do I put this? So I think it's easy to follow a trend, but it is not easy to start a trend. So it's gonna be a barrier for people who want to switch to electric vehicle, because they, we all scared of being the odd one. At least most of us. I don't. They just reluctant because they think it's too weird or whatever. It's hard to explain, but you get the point, right? Nobody wants to be like the first to do something. So how do you like break that barrier? What is your way of? Okay, that's it.
Yeah, no, that's
you get my point, right?
It's a very good point, and I think it's what you're raising is even more of a challenge in the transport sector than it is in other green growth sectors, because in the transport sector, the consumer power is so strong. If you don't have much to say about what electricity you use, whether your electricity comes from coal or from hydropower, you'll still use it. You need to charge your phone, you need to light your house. But when it comes to driving, you have a very strong choice over what vehicle you drive. So the perception of people and the trust of people in this product, and the idea that it's cool or not cool or odd or not odd, that plays a strong role in the spread of electric vehicles and in the uptake of electric vehicles. So that's why we're putting a lot of emphasis on awareness raising campaigns such as the ones that we're running this month. But that's also why you need more. You need financial incentives like the ones that were mentioned today, through tax incentives, making these vehicles cheaper, creating cheap credit lines for people who want to purchase a bike, providing grants or subsidies for these battery swapping stations, all of these measures that make electric vehicles economically more attractive so that people make the choice for financial reasons, and you create a critical mass. And then once people are used to seeing electric vehicle in the streets, the uptake keeps growing. That's also why we're putting so much emphasis on motorbikes, because on motorbikes in Cambodia, the financial will make the most sense. They're actually, even the purchase price right now is cheaper than your average gasoline bike, new gasoline bike. But once people get used to seeing electric vehicles in the street, they may, get more open about electric cars, electric tuk-tuks, etc. So the motorbike serves as a market trigger, as a way to build trust in this market. And another thing that's really key to address the difficulties that you are raising is policy. And Alice mentioned that earlier, but you do have a lot of countries and cities around the world, not just in the developed world, but also in emerging economies, who are coming up with very ambitious policies and regulations around electric vehicles. You have cities like Amsterdam, like Paris, like Mexico City, like there's been measures in South Africa about either banning fossil fuel vehicles entirely, or only allowing electric vehicles, or only allowing hybrid and electric vehicles. It depends on where you go. But regulators are really pushing dirty vehicles out of the market. So what happens then is that what we're seeing now is that the companies that make these vehicles, they're anticipating a global trend. They're seeing 15 cities doing this now. They're like, oh my God, 5 years from now, it's going to be everyone. And so they also start changing their production lines. And that's why these companies are now investing a lot more in electric and expecting their growth to come from electric rather than gasoline. So you get a whole market that is shifting. And I think all of that contributes to a global trend and contributes to getting people used to these vehicles, building the confidence. I have to say that the transport sector and the electrification of the transport sector, for me personally, is one of the sectors that I'm most optimistic about. When the International Energy Agency says, by 2030, half of the world's cars need to be electric, I fundamentally believe that that is feasible, looking at the way countries are acting and simply banning certain types of vehicles, looking at the way the battery cost is crashing, looking at the way the global market is evolving. I think it's only a matter of time for the same trends to hit Cambodia.
I have one thing to add to your point, your questions, Tunit. It's also about the behavioral change. Like, of course, it doesn't open overnight. Quick example, like it's hard to accept no plastics around here. Like everything is plastic, and you, the one using a good bottle for hand it over, is even harder. So that's kind of things happening with electric motorbikes, right? If you, the one who using it around Phnom Penh, you looks odd and whatnot. But that's why we have this a campaign that running with video content, informational, educational content, and doing social media engagement to encourage people to actually touch, feel, and test, and kind of looking at from environment perspective, and also like economic perspective, as Caroline mentioned. So yeah, and at Energy Lab, we're also running a focus group to understand the barriers and challenges that why people are not taking up more with the electric motorbikes, and it's in the process. And along with that, as I mentioned, we are doing this kind of projects and campaign to encourage people to use more. And with that, keep your mind open, more optimistic towards this new trends. And yeah, hope you can you join us.
And it's actually,
Thank you.
if I can add to that, it's actually interesting historically, if you see how quick transport disruption can happen. When the first gasoline cars were invented and put on the market, it looked like the weirdest thing ever. I mean, imagine being used to seeing, you know, horses and horse-pulled vehicles on the street, and all of a sudden there's this guy from your city who drives this very noisy, stinky vehicle. That guy was definitely the odd one out. But that market shifted in the space of, you know, hardly more than a decade. And I can share some materials and some videos about that after the class if that is of interest. So it shows that this is a sector where disruption happens in the blink of an eye. And the same thing is happening right now with electrification of vehicles.
We have some more questions in the chat box here. So how many alternative models are there for charging stations for battery swaps?
Charging stations for battery swaps.
Do you know what that means?
Yeah, I can answer. Yeah, I can answer with the charging stations. Typically, there are 3 types of charging stations. One is at home. It's you actually can plug it to your outlets and charge it overnight. And the second model would be like there's fast chargings. If you can see, there's like technologies being improved in the US. There's like a fast charging stations between states. So if you go between states, there are like 30 minutes charging stations. And with a battery swapping station, I think there's only one model where you go to a swapping stations and you swap the batteries with it's in exchange to the full one. Yeah.
So considering that Cambodia is an emerging market for used cars, which are cheaper than new, shouldn't we focus on getting incentives for importing hybrids or electric cars in the market?
Sorry, where are you reading?
That one
It's an emerging
there.
market for used cars, which are cheaper than new. Yes, couldn't agree more. And that is one of the challenges that we're facing. As much as, you know, an electric motorbike is cheaper than a new gasoline bike, because it's such a young market, there's no resale market yet. And so a second-hand gasoline bike is often still cheaper than an electric bike. So yes, absolutely right. There are some encouraging developments. I think Alice mentioned that the government has just reduced the import tax for electric cars. So we are in discussion with the Ministry of Environment about these things, and we hope it's just the beginning of a bigger trend and that we can see similar incentives for other clean vehicles in the future.
Does Thailand have electric rickshaws? I'm not sure if Thailand have electric rickshaws.
I don't know about I do know Bangladesh has them because I happen to live there for a while, but I don't know about Thailand. We can check it for you.
But to add with the electric rickshaws, not in Thailand, but in Cambodia, we have one. It's called MVL Tara. They actually have electric rickshaws that are going to be manufactured in May and ready to get out into the market. Yeah, so if you're interested, just can Google like MVL Tara and you see a cool looking electric rickshaws that will be coming out soon.
So in the near future, do you believe that Cambodians can shift from using our current gasoline vehicles to electric vehicles? Why and how? I think we all believe that to some extent. We hope anyway. Why and how? Why? Because I think people are driven by environmental concerns for a large part of it, as well as the economic benefits that come with it, because we need to. Because the emissions from transport sector, if you look at the trajectory of where it's going, it's growing, and that doesn't align with the targets, national targets of this country, or globally the targets that are set. So I think the trend is going that way. And how? Well, we hope through increasing incentives, policies, everything that we've mentioned. But yeah, this is something that we will have to work together towards, for sure. Falcon?
Yeah, I think I'm very optimistic about electric mobility. I think it's going to happen sooner or later because as one you mentioned, Alice, is environmental concern and people were driven by that. And as individual, I think that we should consider that as well as a, you know, if we care about the environment, if we want to, you know, make it more environmental friendly, like please choose electric motorbikes because it will help you go into the right path. Yeah.
Do we have any more questions?
Questions?
Maybe not.
Very good questions, I have to
Yeah,
say.
yeah, really good questions. Okay, then, well, I'll share the slides with you all, make sure that you have all the resources you need. We encourage you again to join the campaign and hopefully we'll be on campus in the near future when it's safe to do so, so that you can actually test ride some of these electric motorbikes and vehicles and ask us more questions face to face. Thank you everyone for an engaging lecture, and thank you, Falcon, for joining.
And if I may add, we will circulate a short evaluation survey, maybe through Jose. It would be really great if you could just take 2 minutes and give us some feedback. That will be very helpful for us when we do lectures in the future to hear what your recommendations are.
Do you have a QR code like you just did for the beginning of class? Maybe you can just pop it right now and just make it happen. If you have it.
We
Yes.
don't have it set up with a QR code.
Oh, that is too bad. It was a cool feature.
Well, that's a first recommendation for our next lecture.
That's the first feedback. Outstanding. Yes. Before you let everybody go, take this survey, do it now. There you go.
Experienced teacher speaking.
So anybody has any other questions for this wonderful team that just shared with us? Please feel free to jump in right now. Show yourselves, make sure that you're awake. Are you alive? I'm not sure if they're alive. They're all hiding. Yeah. Well, maybe not. They're all bashful or sleeping. All right. Well, anyway, there's not much I can say about that. But thank you very much, ladies. I appreciate it very much. This was excellent. We really appreciate it. And it's unfortunate that we did not meet face to face. Maybe in the near future, we'll have another opportunities. And I hope that everybody was paying attention about the fact that you said that there's a possibility of some internships. Hello. Yes. I know that I went there this summer specifically checking on that. Oh, yes, they're all showing up alive. All right. Outstanding. They are here. Some of them anyway. Oh, right, there you are.
Oh, Professor is talking about internships at Energy Lab. We also open 1 too soon, so we can share that with you.
Absolutely, please do. You know, for your information, our students are all at least global affairs students, and these are all global. The majority are global affairs. They're all required to do 1 internship. Mostly we do it during the period we call summer, which is basically from May until August. That's a specific semester equivalent where all junior come seniors take an internship. Some people do it during the semester, but during our regular semester, it's a bit more complicated because they have other classes to tend to. It's not impossible, but mostly that's the time period where they do it. So all of them must do 1. There's a variety of interests, and we, through student affairs, we coordinate those possibilities for our students. So thank you for letting us know that you have open possibilities. Anybody else has a question? Oh, about half the faces showed up, the other half are still hiding. No? Well,
Okay.
yeah, I guess that's everything. Thank you very much. I'll stay with my students because I have a few things to discuss with them. I don't know what you want me to do with the recording, but I guess you can tell me later. I'm not sure how this happens within Zoom. It's my first recording. So,
We'll be in touch about that. We'll
Yeah.
figure it out.
Roger that. Yes, thank you very much. And please send me links to whatever material you want to share. We do have a Facebook group for the class, and I can just share that with them.
Oh, nice.
Brilliant.
Okay? All right.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, ladies.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much,
Right.
and have a wonderful
Students,
day.
don't run
everybody.
away. Yeah, don't run away.
Bye.